and he has much credibility and experience in speaking to the subject. Currently, he's Chief Operating Officer at Blendtec, and his past experience, work experience, has been at U.S. Synthetic and Dover International. Randy has always helped employees and the organizations he's worked for improve in efficiency. And just to give you an example of that, while he was at Dover International, his operating team won in consecutive years Best Practice Awards. And then when he was at U.S. Synthetic, he was part of the transformational process that led U.S. Synthetic into receiving the Shingo Prize in 2011. And currently at Blendtec, he helps in operations on a day-to-day basis to really improve efficiencies when it comes to employees, when it comes to cutting costs, increasing capacity, and everything in the realm of operations. I want to make a spill for Blendtec. If you go onto YouTube and you watch they have some videos where they show their blenders chopping up household items, such as iPads and iPhones. It's a little disturbing, but cool. And it takes this high quality, very strong product to do that. And that really comes from the operations. The operations of Blendtec build these machines that are strong. So I would say that there are strong people in the operations department, and Randy's the leader of that, that make it possible to make these strong machines. I'm as eager as you to hear what he has to say for us today. And so if you can please join me in welcoming Randy Stumph to the stage.
Can you hear me on this? No? No? I'll start here. So what I'd like to talk to you today about specifically is ask you this question: what great thing would you attempt if you knew you would not fail or could not fail? And that's kind of an interesting quote for me specifically, because you fail in everything you do. No great thing ever is accomplished the first time out, and winning with that. And failure is very painful, right? At least it is for me. I have 5 kids, and it doesn't take them long to learn that when there's something goes wrong, that they don't like to take blame for that, right? That's bad. If they fail, it's bad. And even this morning, my daughter, she was trying to convince me that our dog, our 6-month-old dog, got into her dresses and tore them all down from the closet, and it wasn't her fault. And that's what happened this morning. That's why our room's such a mess. And so my story that I want to share with you guys today is really about my experience of 4 years of painful failure of not being able to solve a problem. And I wish I had Brian Atwater to help coach me along the way, because I really struggled with this. And to give you kind of an idea of what was going on, we had a customer that's the second largest driller in the world. And I was put over their value stream, and they had some problems with quality. And so the customer engineer came to me and said, "Randy, you're over the factory, and you really need to solve this problem." And we were selling them about 35,000 pieces a month. And about 600 of those pieces every single month would come back to us as failures. And so I took the challenge. I was excited about the challenge. And so the very first thing I did was I wanted to understand the data, really, and really go out there and see where these defects are coming from. So first off, we had to Pareto what the defects were, and we found that the majority of those were chips. And so I wanted to understand where the chips came from. And myself and a few other mechanical engineers went out to the floor, and we did a study. And in that study, we observed the processes before and after to verify where the chips were coming from. And we opened this PDCA on this process to improve it. And after several months, we had some minor success, but really we couldn't control very well, at least where the chips were coming from. So the next step was, how can we prevent those chips to getting back to the customer? So again, with a Six Sigma background, I love Six Sigma and lean tools, we went out there and we did an FMEA on the inspection process, and we found 15 points where you could mix parts or pass defects. So with that, we thought, okay, I think we've got this down, we've nailed this. And after, again, several months, every single month, no matter what we seemed to try, the defects stayed at about 600. So 35,000 cutters a month being sold, 600 consistently coming back to us. And so I went back to the engineering team, the process engineering team, and we asked them, well, we've done some gauge R&R on the tools, and we don't think we have the right tools. And they came back and they said, really, Randy, the process is good. The process is good. Sorry about that. It's all right. There we go. Okay, so the process is good. Really the issue is that your team never follows the standard. And so I try to verify they follow the standard every time. We pulled in a team lead, and the team lead said, yes, I always follow standard until there's a problem, which was the worst thing he probably could have possibly said, right? And they said, so Randy, the tools are good. The problem is you. The problem is your team. You're not leading your team. And so I came back, and we decided we would go ahead without the approval of the process engineers and look for new tools to inspect and find these cutters. And to get the idea of how small these defects were, they're about the size of one of your hairs if you were to cube it, right? So about 3 to 4 thousandths thick, and they would go from one bevel to the other bevel. And you were trying to find this with a microscope, and you had about 8 seconds to find the defect. And it was almost an impossible task. So we went out and we invested in some technology, and we found an engineer that could help us solve this problem. And he did a great job. And it was a remarkable piece of equipment that he created. And it cost us about $70,000. And we implemented it, and it was so precise that it would catch lint, a flake of hair, or a flake of skin, or any type of hair, anything that was on this part. We had to clean our parts in a whole different way. And so I was really excited. We implemented it, and the following month, we dipped down to about 580 defects, and then the following month after that, right back to 600. And the quality manager of the company, he was like, oh, Randy, I'm so glad you solved that chip problem. We had no idea how bad the rest of your parts were. Right? We found scratches, grind marks, cosmetic defects all over this thing. And it was, at that point, it was getting pretty frustrating, really. And it even had an effect on my relationship with my peers. And so we had to come at it from a whole different angle. And I had a guy, and we talked about Shigeo Shingo today, and one of my peers brought to me one of his books, and he sat it down. I still have the book with all my highlights in it. And he said, well, Randy, what you need to do is stop and fix. You need to identify where these are coming from at the point of inspection and not pass those on. And I thought, this is great. The book made a lot of sense to me. I loved it. It was a really powerful read for me. So I started out on this strategy. And I went and I sought approval from my executive. And I'm not sure why at the time I was seeking approval. I think a lot of it was because I had fear. And whether that was because I was afraid that I was going to continue to fail, or if it was because I was seeking approval, kind of cover myself in case it didn't work out. And he turned and looked at me and he said, well, Randy, it seems like you've done all the work that it's going to take to solve this problem. I don't know why you're seeking my approval. And he got up and he walked out. And it kind of made me do a lot of self-reflection. Well, he went back and he told the executive team that I had this great plan, this great strategy, and how I was going to solve this problem for this big customer. And the executive team came out to me and they said, well, Randy, we'd love to see this strategy that you're working on. And the president of the company, and I said, yeah, you bet. Let me pull up my computer. I'll show you. And he turned to me and he looked at me. He was kind of annoyed. He said, so you're telling me that you have this great strategy and that you don't even have it posted for your team to see it? And I said, well, I've got it. And he goes, if it's not posted, if your team can't see it, then it doesn't exist. And he turned and he left. And the entire executive team kind of shrugged their shoulders and they followed him. And so that was kind of an embarrassing moment for me. And as I was going through this PDCA process, I identified that one of my biggest problems was I was trying to control, and I thought I was a really smart guy and was trying to do all the work myself, and I really hadn't engaged the team very well. And so it was a continuous fail for me. And so when it was introduced to the entire team, I had all these emotions. I had a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, and no matter what I tried, it seemed to continue to fail. And so I told the team, my peers, the other factory managers, that I was going to eliminate the final inspector, that I was going to have everybody be the final inspector, that we would put these tools in the place where they could catch these defects. And I'll never forget one of the guys that I really respected, in front of about 27 other leaders, he said, so let me get this right, Randy. He said, the guy that has the most returns every single month for the entire company, and you're going to tell me you're going to get rid of the inspection process. And I said, I'm not getting rid of it. I'm getting rid of the final inspector. And he goes, well, it sounds like a great plan, Randy. I hope it works out for you. And he kind of laughed, and everybody laughed with him. And so it was really frustrating for me. But what my leader had really told me, which was really important for me, was I had not yet engaged the team members. So this is literally 3 years into this process. I've implemented tools. We've done studies. I'd had an open Kaizen events where we'd added additional inspectors, given more manual cycle time to those people. All these tools we were implementing, and I was still missing a key principle that was keeping me from being successful. So the first thing we had to do is I had to reorganize that Kaizen event, and really I had to take away my idea that I had to lead this, and I was going to drive all the improvement. So I selected a team lead that was going to lead it, who was a really an influencer, and then the other person that was going to help co-lead was one of the operators that was a great influencer as well. And they broke up into 4 teams, and they decided this was the very best way to handle it. And they had a group that was going to implement control charts at every location. There was a team that was going to recreate the standardized work, another team that did the layout where all these tools were going to go. There had to be electrical, gas, sewer, all these things inside this factory had to be realigned. And then there was a kind of a special group that had to deal with some of the technical problems they were going to run into. And so once they broke up that inspection process, they implemented it, and within 1 month, the defects went from 600 to 2. And then the following month, 1. And so the biggest change that happened in that entire event was not that I had solved all the problem, right, but that the team had felt ownership. And it wasn't necessarily an easy path. The very first week they implemented it, we couldn't hit demand, and yields tanked. We went from 90% yields to about 60%. And all the other factories had to kind of pull around us and help us so we could hit demand. But they weren't going to give up. They felt ownership of it, and they were driving it, and they were the ones that were really problem-solving all these small things. And initially, when I thought I was going to do this, I thought it would take me about 6 months to really plan this out very well. And what they did in 4 weeks was better than what I could have ever achieved. And this was a really eye-opening experience for me. It changed the way I led. And it allowed me to get better results and get quicker results every single time. And so what I would describe that with is that I kind of felt like I had put some constraints on myself, that I had kept myself back and was keeping myself from being successful with these, what I would describe as invisible handcuffs. I couldn't find a good picture of invisible handcuffs to show you, but that's really what it felt like to me, was that the biggest problem was not the obstacles that were in my way, the biggest problem was how I led and helped the team. So, again, I really love this concept, Hansai, right, which is self-reflection, which is when you recognize that there's a personal issue of performance that you may have and that you're committed to improving it. And this is really hard to do. I think Robert Miller, he's a great speaker. He's shown a picture before, and it has a kitten that's looking into a mirror of a lion, right? And this concept that sometimes it's hard to look at our own flaws as leaders, but we have to do some of this self-reflection if we're ever going to improve. And there's a point of humility that has to go along with that. So I love this concept. And how many of you are math guys that know what that symbol means? Raise your hands. Okay, so about 10 of you, okay? So it's epsilon, right? So sum of your employees' choices equal the organizational results. And that's a pretty powerful statement. If your people can make better choices, how fast can you really become a learning organization? How fast can you really improve? And I think oftentimes people think that leadership is this romanticized version of a conductor. And that if a leader is doing his job right, he's literally controlling everyone in his orchestra and symphony to perform exactly how he wants to perform, and it turns out perfectly. And I think this is a really false concept. And I think it's false because it kind of gives you a sense of what I believe is hero leadership. That people are waiting to be told what to do. And heroes, and I would say most leaders are created this way. I certainly was a hero leader, that you have one or two specialized skills that make you unique and different inside the organization. And when you're unique, you enjoy solving some of those problems. It makes you stand out, it makes you special, and you're not incentivized to help others be successful. And so, and when the leader is gone, and I don't know how many of you are in organizations, but when your leader is gone, how many times does something just shut down? And he comes back, and he's mad because no work has gone forward. Well, I told you everything you had to do. Why didn't you do it? So this creates a big problem. People are waiting to be told what to do. And it also creates this idea of potential and capacity of people. If you really want to become a self-reliant leader, a real true coach that helps people become successful, you have to look at that and you realize that the actual potential and capacity of people are greatly underutilized. Right? So we're not utilizing all of our talent. I think everybody recognizes and everybody feels that inside of the organization, that how successful really are you when you inside of a group? You think, well, if he would just listen to me, maybe my boss would really understand we could solve these problems. And it really demotivates the team. And if you're one of those individuals that think you're only as strong as your weakest link, right? It sends the wrong message too, because you spend all your time with that weak link and you don't raise the team and the expectations for the organization. And I love this quote by John Quincy Adams. If your actions inspire others to dream more, to learn more, to do more, become more, then you are a leader. And that's a powerful statement for me as well. So what is leadership? And I think it comes down to 5 key things. And the very first thing is a shared vision inside the organization. And by shared vision, it can't be just profitability and growth. It is, why do you exist in the organization? To give that team a sense of purpose. Simon Sinek, I don't know how many of you have ever heard him speak. He's a great author and great speaker. He talks about this as finding your why inside the organization, and it's your purpose. And he describes that with the great leaders understand why they do something, and they move from the inside, that concept of why, and he refers to this as the golden circle, of why they do things, and that directs the work. And I would relate that in a lean terminology as those core principles rather than tools. The next thing is a shared strategy. And leadership really is all about aligning the organization. Once you have a vision and have this idea of where you want to be, the next is how are you going to get there? How many times have you come together as a cross-functional team and it seems like everybody inside the group is rowing the boat in a different direction, and they all have their own perception of what that direction should be? Right? So these two work hand in hand. So you have to create that plan. And some people have their whole life planned out. Others, like myself, don't. We have to pull a group together and kind of come up with that and collaborate on that strategy. The next is a shared culture. And this is a shared belief, right? This is what we are in the organization. How do we really feel? How do we think as a group? And this only comes from having shared experiences. It doesn't come from when you bring a bunch of people together and you look at all their different backgrounds and how they're influenced and the schools that they went to and their religious beliefs. You know, those are all personal feelings. That's who they are. And you have to create this experience where they can build their own shared culture. And it's not easy. I used to think this is one of the easier things to do, and it's become probably the most difficult that I've found. The next one is systems, right? And these are systems. We refer to this sometimes as system thinking. But really, inside of an organization, these are the systems that keep the business running, that you must maintain, and also that you can identify systems that must be improved. Whether you're an executive or a team member or a team leader, what you'll typically find, or a supervisor, is that most people treat leadership work the same way they treat teamwork. And that's kind of a funny thing to think about. When you think of a team, people think of, as a leader, if you ask a leader, are you part of that team? And he says, absolutely. But does he perform as part of that team? Does he have the same functions as that team? And the answer is no. His work is different, and he must understand that. And it's not something that's very easy to understand. The last thing is, and it's the most important thing, I believe, is developing skilled people. To reinvest inside your organization and develop people that can problem solve. And if you do those 5 aspects, and I think this is the most clear that I've ever had this explained to me, you can get the organizational results that you're after. That's part of your work. That's just teamwork. If we have more time, I'll go into teamwork and how that's different than leadership work. There's really 3 things that I think have to happen inside of an organization to make these things occur, right? And the very first thing is you have to create an environment of trust. And you have to view failures in process and not in people. And you'll get people that argue this all the time, and even this idea that I don't know how many of you have read Good to Great, but this idea that you have to get the right people on and off the bus. And I think that's a failed belief. I think that all people have great potential, but you have to create an environment where they can expose their failures. So what I mean by that is, it is, like I said at the beginning, it is very difficult to be accountable, to take blame for something when it goes wrong. But what leaders, I think, and what good leaders really do is they don't care who did it. They want to understand how it happened and how they're going to make it so it doesn't happen again. And the people that they value most are the people that can expose those problems and not just bring them to light, but actually can help lead a team and solve those problems. And that takes a lot of humility, I believe, in leadership. It's not easy to do. It means that I don't have all the answers. And it means that I trust you to solve some of these problems. And that's not necessarily easy. You have to let go of some of that control. The next thing I think you really have to do is you have to possess a belief in others, right? And you truly have to believe this. Stephen Covey, he would say that this is the 8th habit. It's helping people find their voice. And again, this is probably one of the most important things that you have to do inside of an organization, is that you have to believe that all people have great potential. How often have you ever talked to a leader, and and they make a comment like, that guy was so good when he started, I don't know what happened to him. And I think what happens to those people is that the organization literally ruins those people. It demotivates them. They see some things that are missing inside the organization. It's very easy for them to fail, and we don't do anything to change it. The third thing is, and let me go into a little bit more detail with this, what I mean by that. These are the only bullet points I have on my slide, but I want to hit each one of these, which are failures are always system failures, not people failures. So, and again, I think sometimes people would argue with that. Well, people make the problems, right? But you have to, in fact, I've had leaders one time, he watched me, I was moving a table out of one of the factories, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to get the people to stop putting their drinks and their purses and their coats on this table." And he goes, "Ha, I would just tell those guys, if they do it again, I'll fire them." Right? And he goes, "But really, I think you have to take out those opportunities for those people to fail." Right? If there's an opportunity to fail, people will make the mistakes. It will eventually happen. People oftentimes, they'll say, when they get a problem coming back from the customer, they'll refer to as, "Well, I'll retrain the operators." And that never solves the problem, ever. The next thing are, people naturally want to perform. I truly believe this. No one comes to work and just wants to put in their time. If they do, they'll eventually weed themselves out. Even if they say, "I don't really care, I was looking for a job when I found this one," those kind of comments, that's just evidence of their frustration. But I think everybody wants to come to work and feel valuable. Everybody wants to come to work and think that they're making a difference. Again, I've talked about this a little bit already, but all people have great potential. If you don't believe that, go down to the floor and ask somebody, it doesn't matter what position, ask them what their biggest problem inside the system is. And they'll help. If you listen, they'll tell you. Right? So the next one is, people value problem solving and improving their work. Everybody wants to make their job easier. Everybody wants to improve work. The next one, personal accountability is disrespectful. And I'm going to speak about accountability and what I think accountability is in a second. I don't like it when someone says, "Well, you need to hold that person accountable." Right? You need to hold that person accountable and make them pay for their mistake. I think you can set expectations as a leader. I don't think you hold them accountable. I think accountability is something I do for myself. And I'll explain that in a second. A leader's number one role is to let people perform, to get out of their way and to remove the obstacles so they can truly deliver value to the customer. The next one are, problems are opportunities to succeed. Right? If we can think of these are great opportunities. These can help people be promoted. It can help people improve professionally, personally. They can be successful in jobs to come, future jobs. They are opportunities to improve. And really, how do you highlight that? How do you create an environment inside your organization to make that happen? And then the last one on this slide is, if the student hasn't learned, then the teacher hasn't taught. And you have to be careful on this. There's sometimes that people think, "Well, I told you everything you needed to do to be successful." And it's obviously because you failed. Some of the very best learning experience I've ever had are having leaders that really struggle understanding concepts. And it's not that they struggle understanding concepts. It's really that I can't explain that so that they can understand that concept. And so the problem, again, I think you have to do some self-reflection and say, how can I better explain this? Why can I not reach this to people? Not all of you will work for lean companies, and some of the very best companies that we have in the state, I would say, are companies like Autoleave and companies like OC Tanner and US Synthetic, and some of these great companies that really embrace problem solving and teaching and valuing people. And they don't just say it, they believe it. And you can see it when you go to their companies. You can see it, you can feel it when you're there. And they believe that people have great potential. So, now, I don't know how many of you have ever, whoops, there we go. I want to explain what personal accountability is here. And there's a great book, an author, it's called QBQ by John Miller. And he tells this story in chapter 16. His chapters are very quick and easy to understand. It's a fast read. But he said, my father, in this book, he says, my father, Jimmy Miller, was the head wrestling coach at Cornell University for over 25 years in Ithaca, New York. And when he'd send me out to the mat, he'd always remind me that I had 3 people to beat that day. And by those people, he would mean, number one, first is obviously my opponent. That's easy to understand. The second was I had to beat myself, which were my fears. Any fears any athlete naturally has, any leader naturally has inside the organization. And the third, he would say, you've got to beat the ref. And by beating the ref, he would mean it doesn't matter, and this is what he would say, it doesn't matter, John, if the ref throws a few questionable calls, or if you lose in 1 point in overtime. There's always obstacles that stand in your way from being successful. And inside of an organization, what are those? Is it a manager that overmanages? Is it inefficient systems that prevent you from being successful? There's always something. And instead of being that person that blames, being a salesman, that blames his failures on price, product, and the lack of advertising, it means he has the maturity to say he was outsold. It means instead of complaining about a manager who complains about his people, why aren't they motivated? He tries to understand, how can I motivate my people? How can I help them be more successful? There's always some obstacle that's standing in your way from being successful. So what are you going to do to change that? And I believe that idea, that concept is what personal accountability is. I love this quote by Stephen Covey. Again, it's the great contributors in life are those who, though afraid, knock at the door, the knock on the door, still answer it. And it takes a lot of courage, I think, to change paradigms and systems inside the organization. But great leaders, great contributors, they are the ones that really make those things happen. And so when I ask you this, again, what great thing would you attempt if you knew you could not fail? There's another story that I'd like to share with you, and it comes from the Oz principle. And I don't know how many people here have read that book, and it describes it. It captured me in the very first few pages of that book. And it's called the Oz principle because it's based on the Wizard of Oz. And it said that book is so simple and so easy to understand. It says, but people often miss the message. And it said that these people that were going to find the wizard that was going to solve all of our problems, when we were going on this path, this yellow brick road, we are victims of circumstance. All these things are bombarding us, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. But the wizard, he's going to grant us courage, he's going to grant us heart, and he's going to grant us knowledge, right? And he's going to solve our problems. He's going to help Dorothy get home. But when they go along the path, they learn that really the lessons are in what they're experiencing, what they're going through themselves. And they find at the end of the road that the wizard is really a fraud, and that there is no one system that's going to solve all your problems. And I think oftentimes this is certainly the case with lean, and I think that's why people struggle with lean so often, is that they're focused so much on the tools. They're always trying to implement some new tool, and it's going to solve their problem. Some new software, it's going to help them see more, have better visibility on the performance of the business, but it doesn't solve the problem. Brian, he had some great points there. He referenced Shigeo Shingo, his idea that if you put constraints on some things, it often encourages creativity. And I absolutely agree with that. I couldn't agree more with that. So inside your organization, when you're trying to make some of these changes, first thing is you have to create that environment of trust that those people can come to you and expose their problems. Second, you have to believe in those people and not blame them for process failures, right? And so when you've achieved that, you can start seeing great things happen. And I've had, since I changed the style of leadership that I used to have very limited, I'd say, success. I would say I was just an average leader getting average results. And what I've recognized now is it's still not me, right? Because I still think I'm just an average leader getting average results. But I've learned that the power and my success really comes from people. And so if you want to lead a team, if you want to be a contributor to the team, how do you engage those minds and those hearts of all your individuals inside that organization? Now, teamwork, I said I've got a little extra time. I would describe that as being different work. And teamwork is difficult, especially with peers. As a supervisor, as a manager, as an executive, coming together from a different perspective and really collaborating to solve a problem is difficult. A good way to describe this is a six-sided solution. I saw this, I believe it may have come from Autoliv at one point. But they show a slide of a Rubik's Cube that comes up. And they said good solutions are the solutions that can solve all sides of that problem, whether you're in marketing or you're in sales or you're in operations or logistics, wherever you're at inside of the organization. Good problem solving happens when all aspects of that Rubik's Cube is solved. And if it's not, then you have to go back and go through that PDCA cycle again in order to be successful. So, are there any questions at this point? Anybody would like to ask?
Yeah, I just want to know, you talked about skilled people and investing in them as critical as for leaders to do. Do you have an example of an organization that invested in its people in a great way to help them kind of unlock their potential?
Yeah, so Clint asked if there was some good examples of companies that you can do. And again, Brian, he referenced one of the best things you can do is benchmark. And I would certainly benchmark against this and go to some of these organizations. And I would list really three that I can think of that I believe have people development systems, right? They look at it as a system. Some people say it takes about 10 years for them to develop a leader inside that organization. And I always ask that question, why would it take 10 years to develop a leader? And I really think it's because those experiences are limited. But there's only so much you can do when you say, and I would say some of those examples are the companies that literally create professional portfolios for their organization, right? They invest in continuous improvement trainers, and they're not just expected to go to a class. They're expected to implement whatever they've learned and show evidence of improvement. But it's more than that. They really celebrate the success. You'll hear that if you went to US Synthetic, you'd hear that in a Kaizen fair. They invite all of their families and friends to go to this. They provide food. They have movies for kids, a balloon tire, a magician, all these people. But really the point of that event is to celebrate the success of people. And so it's really showing evidence. I would call those attributes. You can go to these organizations, you'll see examples of how they've reinvested in their organization, that they really do value people and their problem solving. And so if you were to go to those locations, ask them, right? Ask the people, do you feel that are you valued as a team member? Are you being reinvested in? So I think that's a great question. Is there any other questions? Yeah.
You talked a little bit about accountability.
Yes.
Can you elaborate a little bit about the kinds of accountability that you find unproductive?
Yeah, so accountability, what I think you see mostly inside organizations is instead of asking the 5 whys did something occur, they really ask the 5 whos. Who did this? How did they let that happen? What are they going to do to solve it? Right? You're making us all look like fools. And really, you'll see that, it's really common. It's more common than you think. Even when you try to train your brain to not think that way, it's hard not to slip back into that. And I think really that becomes that blame culture, right? And it becomes defensive, and it's really, there's always some aspect to it, to some point of business. For example, if you were in purchasing, and I've seen this, this is pretty frequent. If you were in purchasing and something was stocked out, well, the salesman will say, you know, why did you stock this out? Why didn't production hit demand? And the purchasing agent or the operation teams will say, well, you didn't forecast this and I couldn't supply the parts. And the company said, you know, and it just kind of goes around in this circle of continually pointing fingers at individuals instead of coming together and saying, what are we going to do to change this process so this doesn't happen again? And I think that's what people think accountability is. It's identifying the person that's caused the problem rather than really trying to solve the system that allows those failures to occur. That's a great question, and it's something I feel really passionate about with accountability because I think it's so misunderstood so often. Is there any other questions? Yes? Yeah, I think that's a great question too, and it's not very intuitive. This took me, I would say, literally years for me to understand this, and the best way I've heard it understood was there's an individual called Eric Pope, and he's an exceptional writer and speaker, but he describes it as this, right? Inside the organization, you have a vision that you're trying to achieve, and oftentimes people measure how they're performing against that vision with values, customer values. And as a leader, you have to say, what am I doing every single day to improve and deliver those customer values? And that work is different. So some people would say a shared vision, well, that happens, once I tell people what the vision is, they obviously get it, right? It's so easy to understand. How could they not do it? But you have to go back and say, and really ask the question, how are we performing against that vision, right? Are we really achieving what we're out to achieve? Does the metric that we've chosen truly deliver the value that the customer cares about? And oftentimes, and you hear this as the Peter principle, right? We elevate people that have the skills in their current position into a leadership role. And it's under the belief, and I've seen this in organization after organization, that people hire people that are the very best at their job. But the assumption is, if they're the very best at their job, then they're going to help the next individual be good at their job. And that's not true, right? And then I've kind of seen a change and a transition in a lot of organizations where they start, once they figure that that doesn't work, then they move to something a little bit different. And they say, well, we're going to find the guy that has the most knowledge. And if he has the most knowledge, that means that the rest of the team, he's going to share that knowledge. And again, I don't think that's true. And I think you start looking for attributes that are harder to teach. And those are things that, in a philosophy inside the organization, that as a leader, you are a problem solver and you are a teacher. And that you're really helping coach those individuals become successful. If you look, the greatest example of this, especially in companies that haven't adopted some of these lean principles, is if you go inside of an organization that still has traditional manufacturing. When the team lead is not on the floor, and in fact you'll hear this if you ask team leads, what is your role? And I've heard anything from a range from, well, I'm a babysitter, which is terrible to hear, right, to I just make sure that they stay on task. I make sure that they're doing what they're told to do, right? And that's hard for me to hear, that kind of behavior. And again, leadership work is different, and you'll see that oftentimes they'll jump in flow because they don't really understand what leadership work is. So if I've created a clear vision, a shared vision amongst my team of what we're trying to do inside the organization, that is different, and I have to continually measure the performance against that. If I'm looking at a shared strategy, how are we going to make that happen? And it can't be, I'm going to tell you what to do. If it's, I'm going to tell you what to do, then we're in a lot of trouble, and you'll kind of go through the same type of learning that I went through of 4 years of true failure, and it's often very painful to see, right? And then the other aspect of that is, how do you create those experiences to create a shared culture? How do you give your operators the opportunity to really try something different? Again, in lean, I think oftentimes people think that standards constrain creativity. Well, I think standards help you identify the variation and allow you to see how to problem solve. So, and then the last things, obviously, are those systems inside the organization, right? And those are the systems of how you deliver that. And I would say in lean, they do that very well. They define foundational tools and principles to help you understand that. But how are you performing against those tools? As a leader, are you continually evaluating how well the system allows you to contribute value? Again, I'm going to reference Brian because a lot of what he spoke about I think really rings true. And they're pretty hard things to apply. And it comes from really a lot of self-reflection, which is rather than look at, and you use that example with the hole inside of a piece of steel, that they really get focused on drilling. And I think that's often been my problem. I've always been focused on what's the problem that you're experiencing, but you have to really go back and say, what value are we really trying to deliver to the customer? Right? Because that's what it's really about. And the customer can also be your internal customers, and it can also be shareholders, right? Your community, those people as well. That was a great question. I don't know if I answered all of it, did I? Okay. Is there any other questions? Yeah. Yeah, it's QBQ. And I think two books that if you really want to read what I believe accountability is, and they have a really strong grasp on that, are the Oz Principle, and it really helps you apply it not only to business but to life, and then the QBQ. And if you just got the audio cassette on QBQ, the chapters are so short, it's such an easy read, and the whole thing is read as little small stories. So I think it's great. It's a great example. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Okay, just a reminder to complete the survey on the app, and the next session will be at 10:20. It'll be a breakout session. There'll be 3 different speakers. Brent Allen from Lifetime Products will be here in this room at 10:20. Aaron Quiggle from Icon will be in room 201 and 203, and Tom Smith from Presto Products. Tom Smith from Presto Products will be 201, 203, and Aaron Quiggle will be in 205, 207. Thank you so much.